One of the great things about journeying in a community of people is that you're often surprised by what bubbles up. And I had no idea that Julia was actually going to share exactly what she shared leading into communion. We'd had a general conversation, but I didn't know the specifics. And I had a memory, as I was taking the bread, of one of my first encounters with Jesus. And it was when I heard a song called "The Power of Your Love" for the first time. And some of you may know of Jeff Bullock and some of the songs. They're certainly important to me because as I first took some steps following Jesus, they were very present in my life. As our group has been journeying with the Pentecost readings, one of the resources that Jill brought to our attention is a little book called The Zoo in You. And it's a collection of meditations, of reflections, of poems written by different Aussie Christians. Some of them quite well known, like Tim Costello, Mark Sayers, Michael Frost, and Jeff Bullock. And I borrowed the book and I was curious about the Jeff Bullock one. And it's the ingredient, I guess, in this Pentecost journey that I wanted to share with you right now. When Jeff Bullock sat down to write "The Power of Your Love," he was at Hillsong Church and he'd been writing a string of worship songs that made him very well known, very popular. There was a lot of esteem. And I don't know if you know him or much of his story, but he came to a point where he felt like he could no longer stay at Hillsong Church. And it ended up being a very painful decision. There was lots of misunderstanding, lots of criticism. He found out who his friends were. And as he reflects back on the writing of the song, he names 3 ingredients that were quite unhelpful in his life at the time. The first one was that he was driven by a desperate need to prove himself. He was very driven. And the very first line in the song, "The Power of Your Love," is, "Lord, I come to you." I don't know if you've even thought about it, if you've sung this song. It's very much the emphasis on the person coming to God. And he felt like he needed to do this. And one of the reasons was, the second ingredient in his life was that he was weighed down by what he describes a constant and unreasonable guilt. He felt guilty all the time. And all the time he would just see his weakness. And in this first verse of this song, he talks about the weaknesses that I see in me will be stripped away. And this was his reality, his life. And then the third ingredient that he names is, I was living at the mercy of obsessive striving and perfectionism. And he just has this reflection. I had to continually come to God because I was driven, because I was guilty, because I was obsessive and a perfectionist. And so we'll sing this song shortly. And it's interesting when we sing that first verse, it's naming a lot of Jeff Bullock's reality. But he had an encounter around the time that he left Hillsong when a lot of his life unravelled. He had an encounter with grace. And in this book, there is a little poem that's written to kind of commemorate that moment in Jeff's life. And I'm going to invite Jill forward if she wouldn't mind reading that for us.
Thank you, John. We're going to hear some Just listen. As I slump at my desk, a magpie on the front step begins to sing. And somehow I can see the tune. A ribbon of black notes drifting through the fly screen, over the hall rug, past the coat rack. As the clumps of crotchets swing past the door frame, I notice a word flying alongside. Grazioso. And I remember from grade 8 music class to be played gracefully. The pure notes swoop toward my chest. I watch in awe as the hard-edged crotchets cut straight into me, through my shirt and skin, through muscle and gristle, until I feel the sweet morning melody meld and melt into my heart like maple syrup on pancakes, until my whole body knows the touch of grace.
I wonder if you've had an "and suddenly" moment. In Acts chapter 2, the disciples have been faithfully gathering for 50 days following Easter. And in the second verse of our reading today, we just have this phrase, "and suddenly." There was a sound. For the first Christians, it was the sound of a blowing wind. For Jeff Bullock, it was the sound of a magpie. I find it interesting how often God's Spirit is pictured as a bird, and those of you who are attentive will have noticed we've had different birds on the screen, and we're about to have another one shortly. As the melody melted into his heart, and I love this phrase, like maple syrup into pancakes, something shifted, something changed. And the miracle that Jeff encountered is a recognition of what grace is and what grace means. The miracle is not so much our love for God. It's also very much God's love for us. For Jeff, in his drivenness, worship had been his celebration of coming to God. Now there was a recognition of the awe and the gratitude that God has come to us, that God has found us, that God has saved us, that God is for us. And if we go back to that idea of connection, at the start of Acts chapter 2, there are 11, not 12 disciples gathering in a room. By the end of the chapter, God's Spirit had been poured out on all people, Jews and Gentiles, young and old, different genders, different backgrounds, different stories, it didn't matter. God has an ability to find us. And my wondering question today, in this Pentecost season, and I invite you to consider it for yourself, is what does connection mean for me this year? For Jeff, it meant a new fresh connection with God. For many people in Acts chapter 2, it meant a new and fresh connection with people who speak a different language, who start in a different place. Julia named a little bit of that in her communion reflection, that her and Grant don't always start in the same place. And it may be that God is wanting to heal and touch and help reconnect a number of relationships in our life. Let's allow Jeff Bullock's song, The Power of Your Love, to minister to us even as we sing it together as one body this morning. I invite Grant out again and invite you also to stand with us as we sing this song, starting with the original verse and then moving into the new lyrics that Jeff Bullock used to rewrite his story, his experience of this song.